Hello and welcome to week 6 of a video series on teaching science in Idaho through the COVID-19 crisis. I'm Riley DeVito, the State Department of Education science coach, and this week we'll be talking about transitioning to a new normal in next year's classrooms and schools. While I personally hope that things return to normal at the start of school, it's important to be realistic and prepared for a new and different teaching model. There are ways that we can prepare ourselves and anticipate our students' needs in order to make sure that the year goes smoothly. I wish I could answer the question for what school would look like next year, but there's really no way to know what the world will look like in the coming months. We can try and stay optimistic, however. Regardless of what we will face in the upcoming school year, it's a continued opportunity to positively impact and influence our students' lives. It is certainly overwhelming to prepare for every possible eventuality, so try and focus on what's for sure. That's what I'll try and cover in this week's video, those unavoidable tasks ahead of us. If we can put our focus into those things, then we can at least enter into the school year with some security and preparedness. One of those for sures is that students will still need to learn and that teachers will still need to teach. Our profession is so incredibly valuable and it's not going anywhere. We may have to approach it with a different mindset and with a different set of tools, but it's still an important institution within our communities. Despite the difficulties of switching to digital learning formats or distance learning, we as teachers have grown immeasurably. We can now take these new resources, tools, and skills with us to upgrade and update our teaching in ways that we never anticipated. So what can you do right now about starting up school again? First, you can take a break. Unplug, get away from your computer for a while. All those emails and to-dos can wait a minute while you recharge your batteries and take a well-deserved break. When you're ready to start preparing for school, it might be helpful to think about the possibilities for next year. I know many districts have released potential plans of action. Consider these and consider how your science teaching may fit into those models. Of course, it's a lot to consider and easy to get overwhelmed, so don't dwell or stress, but be realistic about your expectations and what they may become. Your administrators may not have all the answers, but it never hurts to stay informed by asking questions. Don't get caught unprepared for next year or blindsided by the changes being made. In my experience, some communities have grown closer and formed stronger bonds through this challenge. Continue to lean on your community for support and reassurance. Collaborate with team teachers, grade band teachers, or members of your community to develop a plan for the unknown. In preparation for next year, we're going to talk about 3 tools today. The first thing we'll talk about is assessments, and this is really what we're going to focus on today, because this is the best way to make sure we're teaching where students are at and appropriately pacing our lessons to meet their needs. I'll also suggest how you might adapt what you're teaching, since there's an overwhelming amount of standards that we'll now need to accomplish. In addition to that, we may have less face-to-face time with our students. Finally, we'll talk about how we might prepare for different formats of teaching in the event that things don't return to 100% normal. Assessments. This is really big right now. It is so crucial that we determine where our students are at due to distance learning or early school closures. If your school made moves like mine, I was not able to give a final. Because of that, I need to get a beat on where my students are coming in at. I also don't have any ISAT or EOC data on students from this year, so essentially, I'm going in blind. In order to address that, it's helpful to build effective assessments that allow us to get an early advantage in identifying where our students' strengths and weaknesses are. Since you elementary teachers always have so much going on, assessments are another way to integrate those content areas together. I would ask that you consider combining ELA and math assessments with science assessments. Potentially, the core of the assessment is grounded in that science, but have writing and math elements included as well. This will allow you to assess multiple content areas without over-testing your students. For secondary, I know I'll be replacing my yearly pretest with a benchmark test instead. I'll be generating a test based off of the standards below mine to see if there's any catch-up that needs to happen before I introduce new material. As a quick reminder, there are 2 types of assessments, formative and summative. We'll talk about summative first, since these are what we should be using to determine where students' learning gaps are at the start of the year. Consider using some time before school starts to adjust your assessments to 3D assessments. We'll be talking heavily about what 3D assessments are here in just a moment, but they really do ensure that students are actually understanding the content and not just getting lucky with a multiple guess or getting a 50-50 on a true-false problem. Assessments are also another way to mimic real-world and problem-based science. After all, assessments in the scientific community are anything but a traditional classroom exam. These assessments can also be an opportunity for teachers who are socially or ecologically conscious to incorporate aspects of that into their assessments. Our goal is to not only assess where the students are at due to the pandemic, but also prepare assessments that are best for the students. Some of you may know what 3D assessments are, but it's definitely a new phrase in the science standard scene. 3D refers to the 3 dimensions of the Idaho State standards and the NGSS standard. I've talked about 3 dimensions in the past, but here they are again. The DCI, or disciplinary core idea, is what the content is we are teaching. The cross-cutting concepts are the through lines, such as patterns and cause and effect. Finally, the science and engineering practices are aspects such as modeling or analyzing data. 3D assessments incorporate these 3 elements into questions in order to assess each one. Many of you may be wondering why use a 3D assessment instead of a traditional assessment in order to determine those learning gaps. Well, 3D assessments are the best indicator for understanding. As mentioned before, they eliminate the opportunity for students to guess the correct answer or fudge their way through the material. We are really forcing them to demonstrate knowledge. This week isn't about the ISATs, but it is important to point out that they will be a reality before we know it. Creating 3D assessments help put kids ahead of the curve and allows them to know how they might perform on that ISAT. We'll be taking a look at some example ISAT questions to look at how the 3D assessment matches up with that here in a moment. Finally, the 3D assessment model gives you an opportunity to identify those areas of weakness beyond the content, specifically in reference to the CCCs and SEPs. You'll get a holistic view of how your student is doing rather than just a snapshot of their progress with the content. I'm going to show you some examples of 3D assessments that I created last year. Now, these were my first attempt at 3D assessment, so don't judge them too harshly. This question is assessing a standard about scale and proportion in the universe. You'll see that students are not just dealing with mathematics and computational thinking, but they're also considering scale and proportion and being asked to develop a model. The example on the right is about fossil distribution. Notice here how there's no multiple choice or fill in the blanks. Students really do need to have a grasp on the content to be successful. Of course, these are not the end-all be-all examples. They could be improved by adding specific phenomenon or asking students to do tasks more than simply just write a paragraph, or tasks in addition to what I have that access multiple CCCs or SEPs. So I want to walk you through now what the ISAT considers 3D questions and how 3D assessments will appear in the ISAT. If you go to the ISAT testing portal and click on the Science tab, you'll be brought to this page. Many of you are familiar with these little lock signs, which simply means that you can't get into that unless you have a password and username given to you by your administration and you've completed the TA certification course. However, the sample tests that I want to show you today are free and open to use to the public. You'll sign in here as a guest. You don't need to click any buttons, just hit sign in as a guest. You'll be brought to select the grade level. And I'm going to show you a middle school example because I really think it sort of brings home this idea of the 3D assessments. This mimics what students will see, so you will just scroll through and select any of the options that you choose to. And then of course our friendly screen where we get the audio visual playback, and we'll just skip that for now, and we'll begin the test. You'll see when this test gets pulled up that over here on the left, we'll actually have our prompt and our phenomenon-based question. In this particular example, there's an animation that students will watch of the moon moving through the night sky with the time changing here. It will give the students the task that they need to complete in order to get the question correct. Over on the right-hand side is actually where students are completing the task. You'll see that they will need to select a variable for their axes. They will then add points to their graph, and then they can connect those points with a line in order to answer the questions. So this is not a traditional multiple choice question like previous EOCs have been, which is why it's a good thing for you to mimic these types of 3D assessments in your own classroom. I want to show you a place where you can find a bank of 3D assessments in case you don't want to create your own. It's from Stanford. It's from the SNAP project or Stanford NGSS assessment project, and a lot of these align with the Idaho State Science Standards. If you want to find the bank, it's located here in this middle panel, and you just click Explore the Assessments. There's 3 different types of assessments. There's the short response items, the short performance assessments, and the instructionally embedded assessments. I would encourage you to steer away from the instructionally embedded assessments until you get used to using the performance tasks. I will click on short performance assessments so we can look at an example of a specific assessment that we have. You'll see that there are 3rd grade, 5th grade, and middle school. We'll take a look at this middle school earth science. This is really just a white paper for the assessment, and it just gives you a background on what the assessment is. But we'll go ahead and take a look at what the assessment looks like in PDF format. So again, they give a phenomenon here, just like in the Idaho State Science Standards and the Idaho assessments. You'll see that students are being asked to describe the data. They're being asked to categorize things, list, not just answer simple yes or no questions. Examples are given on how a student might respond to that question. And you'll see it's a pretty comprehensive test. So it's not just something really short that could be done in a couple of minutes. Like, you really do need to give students time to chew on this content. The other really good thing that I like about this Stanford work is that there are scoring rubrics with sample student responses. And rubrics, of course, are really crucial to knowing where students are at and giving them their benchmarks. So you'll see the description of the performance and then the sample responses and the exemplar of the student work there. Another way that you may consider addressing creating 3D standards is by looking at some of the standards on the NGSS site. And Idaho Science Standards are different from NGSS, but there's a lot of overlap. So this is just another tool that you can use. I would recommend going to the Standards tab here and clicking on Read the Standards. I like to select mine by DCI. That's just my preference. So we'll take a look at a high school standard now. We'll take a look at this heredity. And that brings you to the page that has all the standards. It has the SEPs, the DCI, and the cross-cutting concepts. But what we're after is this really small little section over here. And when we click on one of these, it's going to bring us to this specific standard and just break it out more specifically. But what we're really, truly after is this section right here in gray, which tells you specifically some observable features that students can perform to show you that they understand that content. So you can take these and directly transpose them into a 3D assessment if you choose to make your own. So if you're concerned that your incoming students are not understanding this particular standard because of the COVID-19 crisis, you may consider looking at this little gray section right here and figure out how you can tell where they're at specifically due to that. So if you do want to build your own 3D assessment, then I would first recommend making sure that you know your standard. Know exactly what you're assessing as well as the content limit. Make sure you have a clear understanding of the DCI, CCC, and SEP you're dealing with. Then identify a phenomenon that could go with that standard. Unlike my homemade examples, the phenomenon adds an engagement to your assessment. Make sure you're asking high-level questions about the phenomenon, not just those closed type questions. You can do a combination of open and closed type questions, but really try and hit those higher levels on Bloom's taxonomy, such as apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. Finally, create a rubric or use a rubric that's already been written, such as the ones on SNAP, in tandem with the assessment to quantify where students are at. Just to touch a little bit more on rubrics, these are really what help you determine the depth of student understanding. Make sure students are aware of the rubric, and if you're feeling like you want them to have more ownership, I would suggest allowing students to create rubrics. That might not be something that you do right out of the gate for this pre-assessment data. That could be something that you do later on as you build students' self-confidence with these types of assessments. Finally, set benchmarks for the proficiency at which you want students to achieve in order to determine if they really are meeting that standard for their grade level and for their content. Here again is an example a little bit bigger for you from the SNAP project. This particular one uses mastery-based language, but this could fit into whatever style that you're doing. You'll see again that there's the description of the specific performance tasks and the categories that they each fall into, and then student exemplars so that you can know how to grade your students' responses. To round out our discussion on 3D summative assessments, I want to touch on student reception. Unless they're used to this type of model, it can be confusing and intimidating. However, you can do a few things to ease them into it. Obviously, these are not realistic for the pre-assessment or benchmark testing at the beginning of the year, but assessments don't go away and we'll be doing them all year long, regardless of what school looks like. So these are strategies that you can incorporate later on. Make sure students see examples of the assessments so they don't go in blind. Allow them to see exemplars of different levels as well. Show them low, average, and high-performing answers. Have students peer assess and self-assess so that they get used to working with the rubrics. Later in the year, try using those interim ISATs to have them practice interacting with the real test format. You can also be very clear with the learning targets by using the standard language and explicitly discussing which CCCs and SEPs you're going to be working with in terms of that standard and that assessment. As a last note on assessment, we'll talk about formatives. Formative assessments are quick, short, check-in type assessments that give us feedback on instruction as we progress through the content. Typically, these are not graded and considered for mastery reports. However, they are good tools for us to use as measurements of student understanding in the moment. These are particularly useful in dealing with the pandemic learning gap because we can keep track of student growth as we teach, instead of at the end with our summative assessments. We'll need to know where our students are at any given moment in order to ensure that we're on track for proficiency. Here are a few strategies for using formatives in the classroom. You can use hand signals such as thumbs up or thumbs down, or you can have students indicate their level of understanding with their fingers. Index cards or sticky notes can be distributed for students to answer a quick question or indicate their level of understanding. Quick writes are like brain dumps in which students deposit as much information as they can in a short time frame. Concept maps can be used to check for content, but can also give you insight into student understanding of relationships. Exit tickets are very common formatives and simply consist of a task that students must complete in order to exit the classroom, such as answering a question. Finally, journal entries, whether digital or on paper, can give a glimpse into students' progress with the content. Honestly, we're going to have an overwhelming workload next year. We always do, but this year is going to be unique. Not only will we be plugging those learning gaps, but we'll also be trying to teach our regular content. You might also look at standards and group similar ones together into units and lessons to avoid teaching each of them individually. Also, if you have a team, communicate with them, whether it's vertically or horizontally, and try and divide and conquer those standards. How we teach may also look different. Consider using an online teaching platform as listed below. It will be a great way to post assignments, homework, videos, and other classroom materials if your in-class time is shortened or attendance is sporadic. Try and think of ways to maintain consistency, even if students aren't seeing you on a consistent basis. I've talked about these ideas plenty before, but interactive notebooks and science journals may bring that sense of consistency that your students need. They are great for the CCCs and DCIs. If you use them in conjunction with your presentation notes, textbooks, or other content sources, it can be a powerful tool for that digital learning or distance learning. As always, if you need help, have questions, or want to brainstorm, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're all in this together, and we will come out better teachers. You got this. This presentation was brought to you by the State Department of Education.